Welcome to OnePlan's webinar on surviving economic pressures, how leading organizations navigate inflation, cuts, and change. Presenting today's session is OnePlan's Scott Daly. If you enjoy this topic, please explore our YouTube channel for more recorded webinars and follow us on LinkedIn to stay in the know with upcoming events.
Thank you to everybody for joining us today. I would like to start out by acknowledging that the notion of cuts and reductions are not that fun. And honestly, across our client base, people in general aren't very good at it. And they're not very good at it because they don't like to do it and because it's an unpleasant process. These are realities that we would rather not be dealing with. Much more fun to talk about growth and which great investment to make and how we're heading toward the future. But unfortunately, we find ourselves in a place where we need to consider these things. Now, the good thing is that, as I was saying, there are better ways to go about this, data-driven ways that preserve the future capability of your organization, that preserve your best assets and your best investments, instead of maybe the haphazard and reluctant way that a lot of companies come at this. So we're gonna talk about also along the way the role that people in our field can play to present themselves in the best light. So, as we talk about cuts and we talk about making these optimizations and we talk about inflation, it's important to remember that we want to be able to present the work that we're doing in a way that is considered to be invaluable and making a big contribution to the company. And sometimes we lose sight of that because we get too caught in the mechanics of things. But really, if we pause and think about the fact that even our leadership is having to make decisions that they find uncomfortable, and they would love to have people working for them that can help them make the right decisions that will then be perceived in a better light, through the eyes of history. Then we can see that these roles become increasingly valuable even in these times, and they're perceived that way. So our presentation structure is going to be very straightforward. We're going to talk a little bit about OnePlan, the company itself. We're going to talk a little bit about some of the common key considerations that people have to go through. And in this, I don't think we're going to talk about anything revolutionary. Our client base goes through the same kind of considerations that you are probably going through. But it's good to kind of go through and reiterate these things and realize that we're all kind of having the same thoughts about certain pieces of the changing economy. Then we're going to spend the bulk of our time demonstrating how our clients actually use OnePlan to optimize some of these trade-offs, and then of course we'll go to our conclusion. So about OnePlan, OnePlan is an AI-enabled strategic portfolio and work management platform that enables businesses to streamline their operations, optimize their investments and resources while driving growth. As you can see, we kind of cover all elements in this. We connect strategy all the way through to execution. We are not limited to one particular kind of planning or one particular set of tools. All kinds of planning exist in organizations, not just a project schedule, but resource capacity planning and financial planning and budgeting. And not only one set of tools exist in an organization. We work in a world that has, for example, Azure DevOps, Jira, that has Kanban boards, all kinds of different mechanisms for doing planning. OnePlan is compatible with all of them, and ultimately we're also compatible with multiple kinds of work management module or delivery models. OnePlan is a company that's been around for quite a while. We are recognized as a leader in the software industry, and we have a long list of clients. If anybody would like to dig into that further, we're happy to take questions on that. In terms of OnePlan's capabilities, we are a demand through planning to execution and finally analysis product. We are underlied by an artificial intelligence, Sophia ChatGPT. That won't be the subject of today's webinar, But if you're at all interested in our capabilities, I would encourage you to create your own demo instance. We'll talk about how to do that at the end of the webinar, where you can test this yourself. It really is quite miraculous. It's amazing how far we've moved in a very short amount of time. But if you think about things like, oh, I need a business case for this, or I need to ask OnePlan, what are my most at-risk projects? Sophia will provide substantial answers to you for those things. And again, I encourage you to not take my word for it, but instead to open a trial instance and see for yourself. We also provide consulting and advisory services. So anything you see in this webinar, if you're wondering how should we go about implementing this, if we wanted to work with OnePlan, what would we need to do? We offer the full range from do-it-yourself, tons and tons of good information published on the web, also, by the way, enabled by Sophia, so you can ask questions directly and get good answers, through to a white glove support where if you want us to work with you from start to finish to implement whatever it is that you need to, we're happy to write a proposal for that as well. So implementation services, education and training, customer success and support, and advisory services in terms of getting the results you need from an implementation. All of this is available through OnePlan, depending on what your unique situation is. OnePlan is also, it's an enterprise platform. We don't focus on one particular department in the organization. Across our client base, we work with the PMO, we work with IT, finance, HR, operations, product development, and professional services organizations. Any one of these and any one that we haven't listed, generally speaking, as long as you're involved in planning and measuring results against those plans, OnePlan is a very adaptable solution, highly configurable, and will snap to fit what your requirements are. And that is it about the company itself. I'm going to go on now to, like I said, oh, I see a typo on this slide. That's fantastic. I'll go on now to some key considerations in general around surviving, an environment where maybe the economy isn't doing as well as we would all like. So first of all, I want to kind of talk about the features of products in our space. I think a lot of times this helps to clarify why we talk about certain things in a different way than maybe what we normally do. So if we frame this in terms of what happened, then we're talking about timesheets and status reports. These usually come up, finance asks the question, how much do we need to charge back, or how much progress did we make against this budget? The status reports go way back, in terms of how long there, how did we get here, what position are we at today? OnePlan, by the way, supports all of these things in a full featured fashion. We won't cover those in today's webinar. What is happening is where a lot of people tend to stop. What is going on? What are our active projects? What was this week's status report, for example? And there's a lot of value in this. If an executive or some other leader descends and says, I need to know exactly what's going on in this organization today. What is everybody working on? If you're able to kind of really rapidly pull together a portfolio of work and projects and investments, then you look great, and said executive can then go on to make whatever decisions it is that they need to make. The subject of this webinar, however, will be what will happen. And this area tends to involve features surrounding OKRs, modeling, and questions around optimization. And again, this becomes especially important in an environment where maybe we're unable to do not only everything that we wanted to do, but less even than we think we should do. And in that scenario, it becomes very important as we evaluate which projects we're working on, or maybe how many resources we have working at our disposal, to be able to say, look, we're doing these things because we're linking these back to these objectives or these key results. To be able to look at this and say, if we do 15 projects instead of 20 projects, this is what the impact will be on our benefits. And finally, if we just kind of look at our prioritizations and we say, wow, we made this business case and we agreed that these business drivers were important, but, now we need to make some cuts in addition to that, which ones should we be looking at? All of this stuff becomes possible in an iterative and rapid fashion once we're leveraging OnePlan. So our clients are not in a position of needing to quickly scramble across a bunch of spreadsheets and pull together PowerPoints that may end up, taking weeks, but instead they're able to kind of pull this together in an afternoon, go back to their executive and say, look, here's two scenarios. You could do scenario one, you could do scenario two. Their executive can say, what about scenario three? And you're able to make those modifications on the fly based on real information. And in a way that, again, I want to highlight this, puts your executive or your leadership in a position where they're able to make decisions that they feel good about, knowing that they probably don't like making decisions around cuts or around a tightening economy either. Okay. Excel is used by many people to do this today. We understand this, Excel and PowerPoint as well. The why of it is fairly straightforward and needs to be acknowledged. It's everywhere. We all know how to use it. And oftentimes people aren't aware there are very solid alternatives that actually are much lower labor once you've kind of made the initial investment to learn. The problems with Excel, I don't think anybody is going to be too surprised by either. Everybody uses Excel very differently. So when you need to combine them in order to, again, support an executive decision, it's a struggle and a huge lift. It is very manual and very static. It tends to be out of date the minute it's finished. The great flexibility of Excel to create formulas and calculations and do views actually kind of results in it being easy to break as well. Dynamic visibility for resource capacity. This is a very big issue across many organizations. You're in a position where you don't have a unified resource pool. You can't see what everybody is working on. So somebody comes in and says, well, we need to reduce headcount by 15%. What does that mean? It's virtually impossible to get that in a real sense out of Excel unless everything is up to date and working. Again, very time consuming when things change. The one thing is Excel is great at, and it's doing individual models. I mean, you can make really rapid changes if you've built a good model. Again, the problem is that when it has to be linked to live data and multiple people need to work with the same model, it becomes extremely time consuming. Disconnected from the current state of project execution, visibility and insight for overall reporting and governance, and then against strategic alignments against company objectives. Common challenges and errors, failure to align investments and related staffing levels to business outcomes. This is a big one. We all see across our client base a lot of drift that inevitably sets in. Projects that have been started and that people may be working on, but have adhered to an objective that has since been altered. And again, especially in an environment where we have a shrinking revenue pool maybe, or we're having to make cuts, objectives may change dynamically, and which key results support those objectives and which projects support those key results may change dynamically. Once you're working with OnePlan, you're able to see these things in one place, and you're able to make, again, a data-driven decision instead of wondering, why are we working on this project, or letting it become a matter of politics, which of our projects we continue to do, even though we've just decided to cut 15% of our staff. Focus on short-term budget cost implementations when faced with immediate cost pressures. Again, this is an important piece. You don't, as an organization, want to feel like your short-term pressure is cutting your ability to grow next year. And one of the ways to get around this is to, again, be mindful of what your actual longer-term objectives are, and to be able to see those in one place, and to be able to look at it and say, yes, I recognize that we're going to cut this project, but maybe this project wasn't as important as we thought it was, or maybe this project just had stopped being important long ago, but we didn't actually cut it. Cutting services and staff associated with providing business outcomes. We are going to talk about the reality of resource capacity planning and being able to model those things. It's important to understand ultimately, of course, that anytime you're going to come in from the top and say we're going to cut 15%, the easiest way to do it is to just go across the board and peanut butter these cuts, but maybe that's not going to have the best results long term. And then ultimately, right, I mean, common problem is reactionary or disciplined approach. And again, I want to be sympathetic to everybody that ends up being involved in this process because it's not fun. It's not something many people have that much experience with. And the more that we can do, again, to couch this in terms of a data-driven decision and we can provide a decent analysis, the better everyone will feel about it, even though ultimately it's not that fun to work through. Basic actions to take. I don't think there's going to be any surprise on this, so we're not going to dwell on this. We are going to talk about this in light of the product and the demo, reevaluating value drivers, modeling scenarios, rebalancing the portfolio, optimizing the resources we have, aligning with OKRs, and reconfirming strategic alignment. We'll talk about all these again in terms of the context of the demo, but it's important to kind of know that these things are basic. There is no particular set of magic processes. Where I think the magic really comes from is working against a live portfolio with a tool that, again, is going to put somebody in the position of being able to make good decisions and decisions that are going to enable them to sleep at night. All right, and now we're on to the demonstration, and there's no typo on this slide, so I'm happy about that. For the purpose of our demonstration, we're going to come at this kind of as both a narrative and as a kind of feature-driven place. We're going to start by kind of going over how OnePlan supports objectives and key results. Then we're going to switch to how the OnePlan modeler works, and we'll be able to kind of provide the multiple scenarios that we talked about. We'll talk a little bit about portfolio prioritization and the kind of classic sense for how that kind of thing works. We'll then show OnePlan's functionality around cards and roadmap in the context of making these decisions. Again, to kind of show that these things can be visual and more straightforward at the same time that, you know, they're quite substantive and provide a scenario where, again, you can see what you're optimizing for. And then finally, we're going to talk a little bit about making sure that we're doing the best that we can with the resources that we have. Okay, objectives and key results. This is OnePlan. I'm not going to really dwell on a huge, deep demonstration of OnePlan. We have a lot of online videos that can do that. Again, we have a lot of online support for this. And finally, and again, I'll reiterate this probably multiple times. We'll circle back to this at the end of the demo. I would encourage anybody that wants to learn more to get a free trial. The other thing that I always want to mention when I start out is that this instance of OnePlan is configured to make demonstrations easy. That is to say, everything is available to me and I'm able to kind of choose what I need to do to follow through whatever narrative thread that is that I want to construct. In the case of an implemented version of OnePlan, a lot of these things will be eliminated depending on the user's role. So there's a lot of complexity here because it makes it easier for me to demonstrate, but there'll be a lot less complexity when you actually implement OnePlan if you choose to, based on the user's role. Again, I'm not going to kind of dwell on this. Basics of navigation down the left-hand side, common tools across the top. We will talk about what lists, boards, and roadmap and dashboard are a little bit later. You will kind of see this scenario repeated over and over again in terms of lists. Generally speaking, there are a lot of configurable views available and out of the box, and depending on what your unique environment is, columns can be added or subtracted, filters, groupings, all the kinds of things that you would expect to see in a modern application. An objective, for those who aren't aware of it, is a higher level objective set by an executive. Now, in the environment that we're talking about, what we would expect to see is that objectives may change. One of the great things about OnePlan is that you can add objectives, subtract objectives, move key results from one objective to the other, have key results supporting multiple objectives. We'll see how that works in a little bit. But in general, it's a dynamic environment that can be controlled by whoever has the rights to control these things. And you're able to change these things depending on what you need to do. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to select details underneath this objective. You can see that we have a configurable workflow across the top. This can be configured, of course, across the system. So, we just have an example of proposed, active, and closed, but whatever made sense in your environment. Status, also configurable. Every field you see on this form is configurable, plus the form itself is configurable, including things like the schedule, the financials, objective prioritization. You see down here as well, we have associated key results. This can be as long a list or as short a list as you need. You can configure this to certain contributions to certain metrics, all in this particular instance with us saying, okay, we want to actually make sure that we're working on things that suit the new objectives. And again, I think it's important to mention and repeat that this is dynamic, so you can lock this down so that, of course, you can track benefits over the course of a year. But if your environment and your circumstances are changing, you can do that as well. I've now clicked into reduce server downtime. This is one of the key results below this. You can see that we have a trend analysis underneath this. Again, very helpful if we're actually trying to decide whether or not we're working against this key result or not. You can see that we have various ideas and projects associated with this particular key result. More importantly, I think we want to look at dependencies for this. What does this key result depend on in terms of successors and predecessor? I'm also able to look at this in terms of a visualization. If I want to see how this particular key result, and I've blown up my resolution here so things aren't necessarily as snapping to the screen as well as they should, but if I want to see how this particular key result supports this particular objective and branches out into a different set of projects, and then from there also branches out into a set of products, applications, potentially capabilities, this entire map is available at a glance visually, so you can see, oh, if I make changes back here to the key result, what is the knock-on effect going to be through my organization? Again, if we're looking at this and we're trying to decide, okay, how are we going to come at making cuts? What are the ramifications going to be as we move through all of the other work we're doing? You're able to leverage OnePlan, and our clients do so, to make these decisions in a way where you have a full perspective of what you're actually doing. If I ultimately want to look at this through a dashboard, OnePlan provides a set of Power BI dashboards out of the box, but you're able to kind of leverage these things depending on what you need as well. You're able to modify them to full extent. You're able to kind of look at this visually depending on what you ultimately need to do with these things. So when we talk about my strategy, and this will be important as we move on to the next section, we're able to organize everything the organization is doing in terms of objectives and key results, and we're able to do so in a dynamic fashion that ties this all together and provides a place where somebody who needs to make decisions about what they maybe need to cut or what they maybe need to reduce are able to see the full ramifications and impact of their choices. And they're able to ultimately do this in a way, again, that is data-driven and supported in terms of what their organization needs. And also they can protect their future capabilities when they're making these cuts. All right, so now we're going to talk about over the rest of this presentation how we would leverage objectives and key results in a way that will enable us to make these solid decisions. We're going to talk about the modeler next. The OnePlan modeler is a tool for taking all of the live information in your system, plus any, let's say, possible initiatives or conjectural work you might do, and putting it into one place where you can make changes and create scenarios that don't actually impact your live data. So if you think about this, this is a substitute for again, scurrying around, pulling a bunch of spreadsheets together, asking people to email you what they're working on, having to kind of then compose this in a PowerPoint at some point, and then being able to go in and present it to your leadership, only to have them come back and ask to make some changes. So the OnePlan modeler lets you do all of that ahead of time in a very short amount of time, knowing full well, again, that you may want to make a better presentation, but we have full export functionality. We'll talk about that a little bit. And that you're going to need to make some changes, but that's great because, again, Modeler is a dynamic environment. So I'm going to drill into a model. A model can be thought of as any set of projects or investments or what commitments that you have based on a certain set of kind of limiting assumptions. So you can create a model under any kind of particular set of restrictions that you like, including doing the entire system if that's what you want to do. But the model is a kind of a pre-built way for you to come in and say, okay, we want to look at everything that we're working on, and we want to ask the basic question of, how much is all of that going to cost? Okay, great. And how does that reflect against our target budget? Now, obviously, again, what we want to kind of highlight is your target budget may have changed. And in that scenario, you're going to want to look at everything that's going on in your system, in your organization, and you're going to want to say, oh, look, our budget's changed, and now everything is in red and it's in green. And what can I do about this? Again, being reminded that all of these things are a model and or a scenario. They're not actually, while they're working with real information, they're not actually making changes in the core system. I am, for example, able to apply a scenario where I have $10 million to spend. And now in that scenario, my budget is all in the green, and this may be against my new budget. And moreover, I'm able to see what projects I chose to push out. So this is a matter of choice. You'll see down the side that we have associated key results and associated programs. We have a prioritization score, associated value we have, and ultimately a calculated priority as well. All of these things help contribute to us making this decision, again, in a data-driven fashion, which is awesome. I hope everybody can kind of see how cool that is. We've been able to pull this together so quickly. And at this point, I should be kind of leading to the question of, okay, so I've got one scenario. Well, what does another scenario look like? And you can see here that we have multiple scenarios. We're able to save scenarios, delete scenarios. What's the $15 million scenario look like? Oh, cool. As it turns out, if we spend $15 million, we're still under budget as well. All right, that's awesome. And, now we want to ask, well, what's in and what's out? I actually want to say, can you show me the difference between these two? I want to say, what's the difference between my $15 million budget and my $10 million budget? Crank out a comparison of these two. You can see which ones are in, which ones are out. And moreover, and I think this is maybe the most important piece, if you don't want to actually have to train your leadership or your executive on how to use these kinds of things, which is very understandable, everything is exportable. So if you go through and you do your models, you spend a couple hours, you come up with a couple scenarios that you think are terrific, and then you want to go back in, you want to say, no, now we need to present this and we're ready. That's great. You go ahead, you do your export, you maybe polish it a little bit, maybe put it into a PowerPoint. Again, go to your leadership, do your presentation. Leadership inevitably says, what about this? What about that? That's great because you can just come back here and make those changes rapidly, then go back and represent it. Okay. So I'm going to go back and I'm going to deselect this, go back to none. And instead, I'm going to come into my visualizer. And again, kind of going back to where we are, I want to take a look at this and I want to see the choices I'm making in my portfolio in terms of what the impact is through the web of possible objectives and key results that I have structured. Again, this is going to show absolutely everything, but if I start deselecting projects, I'm able to see, am I undercutting the key result that I've decided is critical to my organization? Or, for example, if I cut this ADO integration demo, am I cutting a project that in fact doesn't contribute to a key result or an objective at all? These are kind of, like I said, very important considerations. They put people in a position where they feel good about the decisions they're making, and that's critical. Because if you've got an orphaned project hanging around to one side, that's an easy target at this point. That's not something like, for example, this data warehouse migration that seems to support tons of key results. You don't want to cut that. Maybe process improvement is an easier target in this scenario. Okay. I'm going to come back here real quickly again and point out, in terms of this system, not only are we able to talk about this in terms of budgets, we're able to talk about this in terms of benefits too. So in basically any field that you can configure, we can support. This scenario, you may want to look at this in terms of your decisions in terms of the benefits. You would have needed to fill in some targets, which we don't have at this point, but you're able to then calculate these benefits and how they roll up to the target. Again, you're then able to do the same analysis in terms of the visualization. All of this leading to, depending on which angle you want to come at this from, you're able to make a decision about which projects you can safely cut and which one that maybe you should absolutely not touch. So that's a high-level approach to Modeler. There's a lot more detail there as well. So if you're interested at all, you can either go to our website and do a little bit of research and a little bit of reading, or you can download a trial and see for yourself. Portfolio prioritization. This is kind of the classic view of how people come at portfolio prioritization. OnePlan is able to support this as well, and this is kind of an important piece because this is where a lot of our clients end up working. If you're not really fully or deeply invested in objectives and key results, and instead you have, for example, classified your projects according to strategic alignment, or in terms of just a raw calculated prioritization score, or even in terms of maybe you want to look at things in terms of how much is done for what you might or might not cut. OnePlan supports all of this kind of classic view of how to come at a portfolio, including drag and drop prioritization list if that's what you want to do. So it's important to kind of acknowledge that not every organization is coming into this with a full set of objectives and key results defined, and they may not want to take on all that work, but you may be able to come into this really rapidly with a set of projects, with a set of fields that classify your rough prioritization of those projects. Or again, as I said, you may just want to look at things like, well, what's started and what isn't started, depending as a decision point. Any of those things are fully supported within OnePlan, and it's kind of important for us to emphasize that our clients come at this from all different kinds of angles. So there are people that do it this way and are quite successful. And again, what you're really supporting is this notion that you're not just blindly coming in and making arbitrary decisions, let's just make a cut across the board. You're able to come in and make sensible, smart decisions based on the data that you already have in the system. Cards and roadmap. Iteration of the same thing, but I think very interesting in terms of how we work with this. So if I'm going to look at this and say, I would like to look at my investment goals versus active and proposed projects in terms of a Kanban or cardboard, this is a drag and droppable environment. You can see that we have totals running across the top in terms of what our contribution or budget, depending on what environment you want to be, where you're able to calculate these things in real time against targets. And I'm able to drag and drop these cards across various pieces in order to sort them out. Each one of these cards is also live data, so you're able to kind of do this in real time without having to open up each individual project. But you're able to see, which ones you should be working on, maybe which ones you shouldn't be working on, make these adjustments on the fly, and then ultimately see the results back in your portfolio. It's all the same data, it's just presented differently in a visual fashion. And I think this is one of the huge strengths of OnePlan in general, and certainly our client base thinks so. We're meeting you where you work. We're supporting an environment where you're able to make these adjustments in a visual way, in a data-driven way, and at the same time, we're not forcing you to use one particular motif versus another. Finally, in terms of roadmap, we're able to do the same kind of thing. We're able to look at this and say, oh, I want to see this roadmap in terms of my goals. How are we moving against our various goals that we've outlined? Where are we today? What have we accomplished? I'm able to see this in terms of what our strategy is as well, all putting us in a position where we can make a decision about what we need to continue with, what maybe we need to make a cut on, or what maybe we need to drag out into the future. I realize I should have actually mentioned this back in the modeler and in various other places. You're able to model delaying as well as cutting. I should have mentioned that. I'm sorry. So to be sure, I'm not going to go back to it, but to be sure we emphasize this, we understand that not everything just means cut this project. You may just want to delay it, and that's an important approach as well. But anyway, with the roadmap from the top level, you're able to make these decisions on the basis of, what kind of elements you have deemed important in your organization. Lastly, resource capacity planning. This is kind of an approach that emphasizes, instead of saying, look, we need to really look at our investments and our projects, what we really need to do is ask, are we making the most out of all of our resources? So, and again, each one of these threads can coexist, so you're not forced to override one with the other, although you can align each one of them. But in this scenario, I'm looking at this and I want to say, oh, do I have resources that are currently underutilized, for example, that for whatever reason don't have a lot of work? Again, this is not a very thrilling proposition. Nobody likes to cut people. But at a glance, you're able to walk through your heat map and see not only who is working on what, but how busy they are and can they be consolidated. You're, of course, able to do the same thing by role if you choose to. You're able to do the same thing by groups or teams if you choose to do that. So it all depends on which way you need to make this analysis. But the upshot is that instead of simply coming in and saying, I need a 10% reduction across the top and cutting everything equally, you might instead choose to look at this and say, wow, well, we can see that there are certain teams that are completely unutilized already. That is a likely area for reduction. There are other people perhaps that could be repurposed to areas where we already are over demand. So we're not making, for example, bad choices, the choice to cut Peter because he's already over capacity. That's going to have to all go somewhere else. We'd be able to look at somebody and say, well, we can move people from one thing to the next, maybe utilize them a little better, maybe look at this analysis back up or come back in and say, actually, if we didn't make a 10% cut, we made a 5% cut, but we'd still be able to deliver, 97% of the benefits that we're hoping to deliver. Wouldn't that be great, leaders, senior leadership? The answer a lot of times might end up being yes. So I want to reiterate as we go through this, OnePlan and our client base in OnePlan supports or leverages objectives and key results, leverages proactive modeling, classics of portfolio prioritization, cards and roadmap, and resource capacity planning. Any of these elements can be used in conjunction with each other or in isolation to provide a data-driven roadmap for success in the future, even in a period of maybe duress or maybe not as much growth as we would like. Summary next steps. So when leveraging portfolio modeling tools, an organization should take a strategic, data-driven, informed approach. This sounds very obvious, but I can tell you, again, having worked with clients for years, when it comes to do this process, most people are just not ready for it and they don't want to do it and they don't end up doing this. But we have an approach and tools where you could do this and everybody will come out of it feeling better. Free trials are available to answer questions and validate claims. I encourage anybody that's still interested to do that, and ultimately to contact us with questions. Free trials are here. You can see a list of starting templates as well for each one of these trials. I just want to kind of talk for a moment about this. You will come in and you will see a set of choices. Ultimately, it doesn't matter which you pick. You could always start another free trial. Each one of these trials is simply a configured environment. There's no secret sauce. You could, in theory, if you knew enough, take strategic portfolio management and change it all the way to a PPM for biotech and pharma trial just by reconfiguring it. So I want to assure you that everything that you see in terms of these trials is available as a matter of configuration, not a particular set of customization. And I also want to say, look, it doesn't really matter which one you pick. If you pick the wrong one, you can always pick another one and you can always make a change to it. And with that, I'd like to thank you for taking the time with us today. I hope this was useful, and I look forward to hearing from you.